Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another edition of the Leadership Cafe, where we talk to some extraordinary people who are leading remarkable businesses and where we learn about their leadership journeys. We're your hosts, Michael Couch.
And I'm Richard Citron, and we're so glad to have you joining us today. Before we get too far along, we want to make sure we thank our sponsor, Vaco, a global talent solutions company. We really appreciate their support of the Leadership Cafe. Well, today we're really excited to have really an expert on leadership, both personally and professionally, joining us, Edwin Morris, president of Pioneer Knowledge Services up in Upper New York, right, Edwin?
Western New York.
Western New York. Thank you for clarifying.
The key note for that is that anybody from New York City assumes everything else is upstate New York, but we're actually due west. So
yeah, and you know what? I grew up in New York City, so your assumption was correct. Well, Edwin, yes. It's great to have you join us here, and you know, we've kind of scoped out your website. You've sent us some information, and after reading everything, I have to say, I'm still not clear exactly what knowledge management services are. So if you could tell us about Pioneer Knowledge Services, and of course, we want to hear about your leadership journey and your experiences as a leader.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. And that is always a great question to start with because there seems to be some muddy water around that. So if you think of organizational leadership, organizational learning, lessons learned, best practices, tactics, and things that help an organization become tighter in their operation, those are all things that deal with knowledge and how the culture interfaces with that knowledge, and more importantly, why. And usually the knowledge management definition that I like, and there's a lot of them out there, and the beautiful thing about different definitions of knowledge management is because they're specific to the organization. Each organization has its own needs and whys and here-tos and thereofs and wherefores. So knowledge management is designed to fit whatever that organization is. The idea is that you build a better continuity and trust factor between the information architecture, the IT part, the people part, and the processes. Those are the three main legs of knowledge management. And there is usually nobody in an organization other than a knowledge management type that sees those connections and understands the need for that knowledge fluidity to be there. Not only the fluidity of the knowledge, but the access to. Yeah. How many times in an organization have you seen where how many minutes and hours were spent by an individual to find something, to search and find whatever the knowledge is? Yeah. That's an IT component, but it's also a human component too, because how you search and find things is very much a personal way. You know, how I go about looking through things is different than you do. It's nice to have a protocol built around that, but not all people follow protocols. Yeah, so it's a merriment of a lot of things, but really the idea is to build a knowledge asset in the organization.
Well, and the three pieces you mentioned there are probably the organization's most valuable assets: the people, the processes, and the information, and how those interact. You know, that's really the organization right there anymore, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not so much about where the building and the zip code is.
Yep.
So do you guys educate folks about the importance of recognizing the service that knowledge services provide, or do you provide that kind of service for organizations?
Excellent question. And the thing about what we have, our footprint, why we're here, is to educate the public on what knowledge management is. The second leg of that is that we help nonprofits do knowledge management as a capacity. That's why we exist. When we put in, if you've ever created a 501c3 and had to go through the IRS process to become a 501c3, there's a lot to it. We were the first ones, and I had to spend time with a Tucson attorney to set up, we're an Arizona corporation, to set that up because I had to educate that individual on what I was talking about. But once the light bulb got in there, because he first refused me, he's like, well, that'll never fly. That won't fly with the IRS. That's not a thing. And I'm like, oh yeah, it is. Yeah. So it took a ways to get through it, but once he understood it and the value tied to it, I mean, it took us 5 months to get the IRS. We didn't even get a kickback. They just we're good. So we became the first 501c3 that was a charitable knowledge management function in the U.S.
Wow. Wow.
Very cool.
That's
It's great that the IRS got it. That's pretty cool.
Well, it's not really a hard sell at a federal level. The Department of the Army adopted knowledge management as an operational capacity in 2007. So, and the federal government, thanks to Obama, started the open.gov, right? That taxpayers paid for this knowledge. Why do they sit on it? Why is it not accessible to the average human? Yeah. So there was really a push to demystify knowledge and assets and information data to make it more accessible. The accessibility piece is a big part of that.
Mm-hmm. So with the nonprofits that you're working with, once you've got them educated, you've got the map, as you called it, I believe, in place. What's the big payoff? What's the benefit for the organization?
Well, that here again is all tied to what you guys talk about, which is leadership. Yep. So you can come in with the best application ever, software, hardware, whatever, but unless the adoption and adaption of the work culture uses it, it was spent money for nothing.
Right.
So, and I see that a lot in organizations where they think information technology solution is going to fix all their problems without really looking at what's called now the user interface or the user experience. That user experience. And a lot of organizations don't realize that their internal facing center of information and knowledge is a user interface. So if you don't think of your consumers, and that's all your employees are, they're consumers of it and producers of your knowledge, that you're missing the boat. So I think a lot of leadership has to be there in order to carry a good idea forward, regardless of what it is.
And that is so key. We're working with a couple clients on the employee experience, which changed dramatically in 2020, and now that user interface makes up such a huge part of the employee experience. And if that consumer is not happy with that experience, they're disengaged. So it's a key part of the culture work now too, that I know is another area that you focus in on, is leadership and culture.
Yeah, they're definitely tied to the hip. I mean, the leadership and culture, positive or negative, are tied at the hip.
Yeah. That's our whole, when we start working on leveraging or renovating culture, we start with the leader behavior. We start with the skilling of the leaders, which is again right into the kind of things we've been talking about on the Leadership Cafe.
It's all very exciting of where I've been a progressive in the mindset that telework has always been a part of my framework for probably 15 years.
Great.
And I've actually looked at work cultures that either adopt it or don't, and why. And the biggest negative that I'd seen long before 2020 was that most organizations would not adopt the telework basis because they didn't trust their employees.
Right.
They didn't trust that they were doing what they were getting paid to do. Yep. And my argument was, have you ever hung around the little cafe you've got in the working area, the coffee pot area, and seen how much non-productivity goes on when people are just hanging out, BSing? That's always going to be an issue. And I think if you hire right, I think that's the big issue, is if you don't hire right, you're going to get what you get. So if you're not particular about who fills that seat, then don't be particular about who fills that seat.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's another element in that, which is that nobody really works 40, 50, 60, 80 hours a week. The truth is, you work 2 hours and you take a 10 or 15-minute break. You need to do that. The brain is not geared towards working in straight shots. So whether you're going to the coffee bar at work or whether you're going for a walk outside, knowledge workers particularly, but even manual labor, manufacturing people need a break. The body and the mind is not geared to working that way. So leaders, gaining that bit of knowledge about how work actually happens is a critical factor. But you were early on that bandwagon of remote work.
Well, when I first became certified in knowledge management, it was through a contract through the U.S. Army. And that individual came to Fort Huachuca, Arizona to conduct the training. And that's really what lit the fire under me for knowledge management, because that was the first time I'd heard the term in relationship to behaviors. And I'm like, oh, that's me. I do all that stuff. So apparently I'm a knowledge management guy. So I immediately looked for opportunities for gaining a master's degree in that field. And at that point, that would have been 2011-ish, there was only 2 schools in the U.S. that had online programs. And so I jumped on Kent State because they were not a cohort program. The other one was a cohort program. That has all changed now. There's a lot of universities that are offering knowledge management at the undergrad level, which is where it should be. I mean, you need to start building that understanding and behavior. And every business school should be teaching knowledge management because it's a leadership skill. And so I'm excited about it because the potential has just got kicked 100 yards in 2020 because everybody had to change to survive. And adaptation and adoption to new skill sets will just change the organizational view forever.
Yeah,
Edwin, is knowledge management an outgrowth of library science? Is there a connection between those?
There is, because they didn't know where to put it before. There's 2 different, right? I mean, it's just one of those things. Peter Drucker actually first labeled us in 1958, I believe. Check my figures. But I think it was 1958 that he first labeled knowledge workers, knowledge work, in that mentality that work is not what it was in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. Right. Things have changed, and they definitely have changed in the last 50 years. So the idea that, what was your question again? I got lost.
The relationship between library science is knowledge management and outgrowth of library science.
So as of about 3 years ago, there's 2 different degree paths for knowledge management. Mine was from Kent State University, and that was in library sciences. There's another venue or category that knowledge management degrees come in now, which is business, which is where it should be. Yeah. My view is that it should not be in library sciences. It should be in business operations, organizational learning, organizational leadership, somewhere in business. It should not be in library sciences because when it first came about, and that program was the first in the United States to be out there in an online format, and I think they went live in 2008, 7, somewhere in there, early 2000s.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
Good.
Yeah. So I just saw a report from McKinsey that I think globally, talking to surveying executives, about 75% of them said that their office is going to change dramatically. It's not just office space, but how they think about office is changing. And so it sounds like leaders are getting this, but leaders are going to have to play a key role in moving the culture in that direction too, I would assume. Well,
and here again, it goes back to that hiring process. If you're going to build out and have people of grit, an element of I care about what I'm doing, that has to really get fleshed out in that whole onboarding process. Right. One of the things that I liked about, and I can't remember if it was Amazon. No, it wasn't Amazon. I can't remember the company, but their process was to bring them in, show them the culture, give them a week worth of, back when everything was face-to-face, a week worth of onboarding, and then do a buyout. Pay them a check to say, hey, if you're not drinking the Kool-Aid, you're not getting the vibe, here's a check, thanks for your time, get out of here. That mentality, and it wasn't.
That was Zappos.
Zappos, thank you.
Yes, yep.
What a brilliant concept. You could relieve so much dead weight at that point with no shame, right? Just say either you're with us or not. If you're not with us, fine, here's a check. What a beautiful way to just weed out some of the riffraff, or I won't say riffraff, but some of the people that are just floating through, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's not a good match. Yeah, right.
Not a good match.
Yeah, and that's why we're seeing in the work we're doing in terms of changing onboarding. It's not about getting the computer or getting the paper signed and sitting in your office. It's building the relationship and understanding the culture. So the idea of doing that in hiring, focusing on that in the first 90-day kinds of things is key. Yeah. And then we do that consistently when it comes to developing the next generation of leaders too. You have those culture poison pills, and if you want to renovate your culture, one way to do that is move them out. Another key piece there for sure. Yeah.
So Edwin, you've got an amazing resume in relationship to leadership development, both professionally and also in the military. I love the fact that on your resume you talk about your business leadership skills, your civilian education, you call it, and your military education. Can you talk a little bit about the contrast between those? I think I don't want to see which one's better. I think it's probably well, maybe I should ask that question. Yeah. But how have they come together for you in how you view leadership?
So leadership has always been a choice, right? There are people that are always priming the pump, always looking for the next, and I won't say option, but the next challenge. And good leadership is always looking to expand. In my experience, as I was in the military, I would get opportunities and I'd be like, sure, I'll go to that. One of the funny things is when I first joined the military, I had somebody that was of a Vietnam era say, don't ever volunteer for anything. Don't ever volunteer. That was the old adage. And I always flipped that. I was like, oh, you're looking for, yep. I'd always raise my hand because there's a challenge to myself that seems to have, and I learned this early on, that if I just did it if I had a gut feeling, yep, I'll do that, it would seem to work out to whatever the benefit was supposed to be. So like trust the universe has always been kind of a fallback for me. Yeah. So I never let that fear guide my decision to plus and negative conclusions. But overall, they've all paid off. So I think the military in its set of, it is funny because I started off in the 80s, right? So military schools, military learning was not learning, it was training, right? Yep. There's a difference.
Huge difference.
When you're training, give you a good example. I have not touched a deer rifle in probably 15 years. Since where we moved, it's pretty rural. I thought, well, maybe I'll go hunting again. So I went to go sight in my new rifle that I just picked up. And it was like, it was right back there. It was right back to the training because the muscle memory, I didn't even have to think about what I was doing. It was just there. That's training. Learning is totally different. So I think the academic approach came at a time in my life when I was ready for it. I was never a high school proponent of higher ed. I was a vocational tech guy, and school for me was a big challenge, or I was a big challenge for school. Either way you want to play that.
That's a great way to look at it.
But after the Army experience and then having cash to go to school, thanks to my sister Barb, she talked me into, because I just figured I'd go to some VOTEC school, learn some trade, right? It's all about making money. It's about work. It's all that. And my sister talked me into just trying a college course in the summer. And I'm like, I'm just like, I've never taken a college prep course. I barely got through high school. Are you kidding me? College is for really smart people. Well, after the first summer session, I'm like, it's not for smart people. It's people that can follow directions. I can do this.
People who can learn.
The people that are, exactly. But I think all the military training and all that experience of living overseas and so-called maturing a little bit, led to my opportunity of higher ed, and I chopped it up and ate it like toast. I just consumed it. And ever since then, I've been a consumer of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's what we don't do training. We do development. And I think it's the same thing. And as we work with leaders, we work with them to learn how to learn is often a big part of it. And we look for learners when we want to help companies find the next generation of leaders. So your observation there of the difference between training and development is right on. We see it all the time.
Edwin, we haven't talked much about the pandemic, which has been a theme for us. And as we start to wrap up here, one of the questions that we've been asking folks here on the cafe is not so much what 2020 has done to you, but what has the pandemic and 2020 done for you? What's been the learnings and takeaways? And if there's been no losses in your family, maybe even some of the gifts.
Well, to me, it's helped. I've worked with an organization, a nonprofit organization, as a leader for 7 to 8 years. And I've been a proponent of distance connection, distance learning in that organization that was totally in this mindset of like most higher education that's brick and mortar. You got to have face to face. Online doesn't work. Online's not the same, and all that type of pushback you get from academics in that transition to online. That this organization fought it tooth and nail. They didn't see any value, and 2020 has totally 180'd those folks to the point where they're talking to me like I need to get on board with them. I'm like, wait a minute, I've been leading this band for how long? Sit down. Yeah. But so it's kind of unique in that it has helped bring a vision of what's possible to a lot of individuals that could not see beyond their own little world experience. And now it's like, I give you a good news. We're on fiber here at our house. So I've got the biggest pipe I've ever had for connection at a time when apparently I needed to have a big pipe for connection. And I think the new paradigm, as people move and move with jobs or move wherever, one of the big indicators for where they want to move is not so much the school district, not so much the local taxes, but what's the internet? What do you guys got for internet over there? Because if it's not at least this, we won't even look at it because it's become such a staple. It is really. And the sad news is that I don't know if you guys have this problem, but if you ever check your internet speed, it is all over the board, right? Yep. And it's like, what other utility can you provide that is like at this level? Or can you imagine buying your electricity that like, oh, you only get 10 amps right now. Oh, wait, you got 100 amps now. Oh, it's just. Hopefully someday somebody will figure out how to make that a stable system. But I think that's the biggest indicator of where people's minds are going into this year in the future is that how do we stay connected? Not only for work, but for your children. How many challenges are out there for families that don't have good internet connection and are supposed to be teaching their kids online? How do you get around that?
It's a core and it's nice that we finally come around to that. It's too bad that it took some disasters to get us there. But well, it's been I could listen to this and listen to you, Edwin, all day. But we want to thank you for being on the cafe with us. We'll be, as we mentioned, we'll be sending you a signed copy of our book that touches on a number of the topics we've addressed here: strategy-driven leadership. So we also want to make sure we thank our sponsor again, Vaco, for helping make the Leadership Cafe up an important place for the leaders like Edwin and others to hear from the trials and tribulations of leaders who have learned over the years and been able to make a difference in what they're doing. You can listen to the podcasts on both of our websites, on Richard and Michael's website, my website. Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Edwin, also you have a nonprofit.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
We want to make sure how people can reach you. And of course, as a nonprofit, I know you accept donations. And so you let folks know about that and also about your podcast. You've got a podcast as well.
Sure. Because You Need to Know is the name of the podcast. You can find us out there on a couple different platforms or at our website. Just search pioneer-ks.org. But really, the podcast is just a communication tool to share experience. Same philosophy you guys have in this podcast is to share experience. It's an easy way to go. The nonprofit is Pioneer Knowledge Services, and we are built to help nonprofits do knowledge management. Excellent. And to provide education. So this year is going to be a big year for us as we build out an LMS for the first time and provide actual delivery of good content and training, education, actually, not training.
The learning management system.
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yes, learning management system. Thank you.
Yeah, so we also want to make sure that we thank our producer, director extraordinaire, Michelle Jaruzelski, who we couldn't do without all the support that she provides. So for all of us at the Leadership Cafe, thanks for joining and signing in. I'm Michael Couch.
And I'm Richard Citron, and we look forward to connecting with you on the next Leadership Cafe. Thanks, Edwin.
Thanks, Edwin.
Thank you.